Welcome to Champions 101. I am your host and quasi-game master this evening, Shane Harsh. Tonight's objective is to explore and introduce people to the Champions RPG. Now, Champions, in all of its incarnations, has been around for over 30 years. I certainly encountered it in my early days, some fun stories on how I got involved with it. And one of the first role-playing games that I've owned and run, I can assure you that my 13-year-old campaigns are not quite as refined as my current campaigns, but only just a smidge. Only just a smidge. It's probably pretty close to the original. So the system's been around in various forms, going through multiple editions for various reasons. But the core of the game has remained the same. And I sent out the Hero in 2 pages, which is a wonderful document put together by the Hero community, and very, very easy to read. And really demonstrates how the core of the system can actually be really easily played. It's almost like in some ways it's almost like chess. It's very easy to learn some of the fundamental concept of Hero, and then you can spend a lifetime playing it and always uncovering new things. So I sent out also posted a couple links. One was to a Google sheet that I had authored from Legendsmiths, and that's it's a fully calculating spreadsheet for designing your character, kind of modeled after the kind of the standard format or the official character sheet format, and it also includes a Powers worksheet. And I'm going to use that just to demonstrate throughout tonight. But there's also a link to an Excel sheet. Not everyone has a Google account. Although if you're connecting to this, unless you're watching it live, you probably won't. You probably should have access to the Google sheet. So I encourage you to use that. It's easy to use and actually runs pretty well on an iPad and things like that. So you can have your characters. Also very handy for sharing your characters with your game master, because you can share them up and keep your character up to date. No swapping files, no special file shares. You just go with it. So all of the players in my campaigns that don't use the official Hero software, the Hero Designer software, which is my go-to program, use the spreadsheet. So that's what we're going to start with. But we're going to start with some core concepts first. So I'm going to do a little screen share here, and I'm going to also have the chat room open. So if for whatever reason it doesn't come up or something is unclear, either pop up in the chat or let me know that you have a question. So I don't mean this to be a monologue. I mean this to be a discussion. So I'm screen sharing a core document here. Let me try to make that a little bit bigger. So this is the Champions Complete book put together by Derek Heimforth, part of the Hero ecosystem. The Hero ecosystem is comprised of a number of authors and designers that are interested in helping the Hero system continue to develop and evolve. There's a number of things that are in the Hero lineup right now. Currently in the pipe is the Fantasy Hero Complete. So much like Champions Complete, it's a complete guide to playing fantasy RPGs using the Hero system rules. Then there's my book as well, the Narosia Sea of Tears, which is a complete standalone RPG built with the Hero system, but it's also a core setting. So you can check that out at legendsmiths.com. But one of the first things that you need to understand when we're going to make a character in Champions is, what type of character are we making? What campaign level are we talking about? One of the great things about Hero is that it scales. If you want to play a game at this, skilled normal 50 character point level, it's great. The game works. Um, and it also it forms, allows you to do some interesting things from a campaign perspective. You could start your characters as 50-point teenagers, maybe jump ahead 50 points in a number of years, and play the college years, and then do that for a couple months, and then jump ahead until their careers have established, and they've gone off and joined the CIA and all those kinds of things, and now bring them back as 175-point characters now with full experience. And along the way, maybe they had some great background experience to build into that. I did that in one of my Narosia games. It was a lot of fun. So it's nice to be able to do that in a consistent way, and then they carry it all the way up to superheroes and beyond. So what we're going to do today is just to keep the numbers a bit smaller, is we're going to focus on low-powered superheroes. So these might be some some Teen Titans. I'm actually not all that familiar with some of the teen genre, maybe some of the original X-Men, not the current X-Men. Certainly not Cyclops or Dark Phoenix or anything like that. But when they were just starting out. That's a good example of how a campaign can evolve from 300 points on upwards of 600 points. What I consider, for relative scale, what I consider my comfortable builds of Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, and things like that, I put them at around 650 points. So that gives you a good sense of starting hero to experienced hero, and a great way to evolve your campaign. So we're going to zero in on this 300-point level, and you'll notice that it's got a number of matching complications. And if you've never played a game that has complications or disadvantages or trouble aspects or anything like that, this might be a new concept. But what we're saying is that for a character of a certain amount of points, he's going to get to that level with a certain amount of baggage. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's all bad. It's just these are things that can complicate the character's lives. So when we get to the complication section, we can talk more of that. But to use an example from D&D, being lawful good would be a complication. It's going to limit your character's actions in certain situations and force you to play into a certain type. So that's a classic example. Batman's code against killing. Very classic example of complications, and something that he feels very, very strongly about. So he's unlikely to vary from that. So those types of ethics or codes of conduct, or certain weaknesses, perhaps to things like kryptonite or things like that, those are all examples of complications for your character. So moving on from here, we really have to start to think about kind of the standard game system stuff: characteristics, skills, perks, talents, powers, power modifiers, power frameworks. Now, that seems like a lot to bite off at first chew, but one of the nice things about this is if we walk through kind of creating a classic superhero, we think about their origins. Are they an alien, intensive training, mutant, things like that, kind of listing those out. You can draw from any source of comic books. But then we also want to think about motivations. And now we're starting to think about, all right, what might be some of the complications that we lean into: sense of responsibility, thrill seeker. These are all things that can contribute to complications. But then we start to get into skill sets and power sets. And I'm going to jump over here to power sets because we want to think about some of the classic archetypes that we have in the genre. So we've got your blasters, things like Cyclops. Iron Man could be, definitely a blaster. He's an armored blaster. So if you're thinking about a blaster and you're following along in the Champions Complete book, then on page 174 you can get an idea for, do you want an air, wind blaster, earth, stone blaster, electricity blaster. I'm going to come back to that, and we're going to skip to from blaster to other types of attack sets. So you can think about controlling machines, a classic mental attack set, just going with super strength or being stretchy. So these are some of the archetypes that you might want to be thinking of. So if we're talking about more of a Hulk or a Thor, here we're talking about more of a brick style super strength aspected character. If we're talking about someone like a Hawkeye or a Spider-Man, there we're talking about more agility, more moving around the battlefield, and they might be leaning more towards the defensive types of powers. Also, thinking about your movement types. So this is what's summarized in the Champions Complete book. I'm going to pull up another book here that I like to use, and this is actually the Champions Core book. And one of the things that is included in the Champions Core book is a set of templates. So let me change my screen share here over to Champions and superhero archetypes. So here we can see them fleshed out even more. We've got your Brick, so that's your big, strong, tough guy. We've got your Energy Projector, your Gadgeteer, kind of a Batman type, Martial Artist, Iron Fist, Mentalist, classic. This is a Metamorph, so anything dealing with shape-shifting or malleable bodies. Mystic. Mystic is kind of a potpourri, a hodgepodge. Powered Armor, classic Iron Man. Speedster, obviously wanting to go fast. Weapon Master. You could put Hawkeye into this realm. You could argue that Thor's in a Weapon Master, but I think he's really more of a Brick. And then you can kind of combine those types. So that being said, laying the groundwork, knowing that we have a vast array of material to draw from, we're not going to boil the ocean. So let's think about what our primary attack power is. Let's think about what our primary defense power is going to be. Let's think about what our primary movement power is going to be, and a utility power. And let's put them together in a theme. So think about your theme, write it down, whether it's Brick, Blaster, if it's a type of energy, like lightning's all that comes to mind, that's great. Go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to switch over to my character sheet here. Screen share. Takes a minute to switch. There we go. So I am going to do a Blaster. I'm just going to make a note of my Blaster there. And I can go through the characteristics, but I'm gonna let characteristics sit for a minute, and I'm gonna jump to the back tab here, and I'm gonna think about my powers. Now, the Google Sheet, you'll notice that all these fields are all references actually to the Powers worksheet. So I'm going to go to the Powers worksheet, and this is where I'm going to build my powers, and we'll walk through all the steps associated with that. So before I continue on with that, are there any questions?
You had mentioned that you had a link for that sheet.
Yeah, you can either find it on the Legendsmith site under Downloads, or if you look in either the Facebook or the Google event, it should be in one of the messages down below somewhere.
I'll just go to Legendsmith. That's easy. There it is.
Yeah, both the Excel sheet and the Google Sheets in there. Looked like we had someone that's lost, but Mr. Franklin was able to get in, so that's good. So, building a power. I'm going to do a classic fire blaster. Keep it nice and easy. Is there a question? So since we are broadcasting live, I'm going to ask you that if you don't have a question, just keep your microphone on mute. But if you do have a question, go ahead and unmute it and fire away. Just keep the background noise down to a minimum. So when we're building a champion's character, one of the things that we do is what's called reasoning from effect. So we don't really even start with the powers. What we start with is the core concept of the power that you're trying to create. And this has been consistent across all versions of champions over the years. But it's really an important concept because it's very easy to get lost in the weeds. If you're just trying to build a power for a power's sake. So I'm going to take a classic firepower. It's just going to be essentially a fireball, an explosion. So I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this power Fireball. Now here's where you have to choose some of your core effects. And I am getting a lot of background noise, so I am going to ask again, mute your mic unless you have a question to speak up. There we go. Okay. So, Fireball. Well, what does that do? Fireball, it does a lot of damage. Okay, so I need some kind of damage-causing power over here. But what kind of damage? Now in Hero, there are two fundamental types of damage. One you'll see called normal damage, and that's represented by the blast power. And the other one is what we call killing damage, and that's represented by a ranged hand killing attack. In this case, we are going to focus on range. Since we're talking about Fireball, it's something that I'm sending downrange, if you will. And the choice comes down to how likely is it that you're going to seriously hurt someone. You know, we see in the comic books a lot of times, boom, boom, these titans are trading blasts back and forth, and nobody's really getting hurt. And that really implies that blast is probably what you want to focus on. Now, if you're doing a grittier, more street level, where the lethality is potentially high and characters could get killed, well, then you might want to start thinking about a ranged killing attack. Or in a four-color, from a four-color perspective, I might also build a ranged killing attack if I'm going to use it to destroy buildings and my surroundings, but not necessarily use it, or vehicles, but not necessarily use it on other characters. So I'm going to focus on the blast power. Now, blast is nice and simple because it conforms to one of the standard heroisms, which is 5 character points per 1d6 of effect. Okay, that's great, Shane. But now we're talking character points or we're talking dice. Well, when we started this, I said we were going to build 300-point characters. So that means, 5 of those 300 points is going to be allocated per 1d6. It gets more involved in that, but we'll leave it at that for now. But the question is, how many dice of damage? What is a lot of dice of damage? Now, within the Hero rulebook, there are numerous sources that you can look. There are lists of standard weapons. There's lists of environmental effects to give you a rough gauge. But more importantly than any of the real world aspects of it are, what are the campaign guidelines? And the campaign guidelines are something that the game master sets out and says, look, for the game that I'm going to run, I really don't want to see attacks of, more than 12 dice of damage. That's a pretty standard hero threshold. 12 dice or 14 dice, right? So we can say, okay, that's good. I know that if I'm making a character in this campaign and I want to have a top attack, that's going to be 12 dice. That also implies that mid-level agents or villains that aren't really on par with the lead characters are going to be somewhere below that, probably in the 2/3 to 3/4 range. And that's just something that the GM decides when they build the campaign. The book talks about that and setting those campaign limits. But there's nothing in Hero that inherently limits you from not buying a particular power. You could build a 300-point planet-killing power if that's what you want. And if the GM allows you to have it in the game, then great. I hope you enjoy it. So you're not going to find any hard and fast, oh, you can't buy this power unless you have this power. There's no prerequisite linkages. You just decide what the effect is going to be. Now, while I might say, okay, boom, blast, I'm going to do 12d6. Great. That gives me a base cost of 60 points, right? That's going to be 5 points per die, 12d6. I now have a 60-point power. And if that's all I want to do, I'm done. Simple fire blast. But I really said conceptually that I wanted to do a fireball. Now, a fireball is an area effect type power. Now, you can make it an explosion. You can make it just an area effect. Those are the choices that you need to make. So we're gonna choose to make it an area effect power. Now, how does area effect work? Wish I could switch back and forth a little bit easier, but I'm going to go back to my Champions book for a minute, pull that up, and take you to the advantages section. So we're coming over here, and power descriptions. So here we had the blast power. This is what I was talking about. And here we see that it's 5 character points per die of blast. That's great. And I decided on 12 dice, so that's cool. But now I'm going to go and apply a power modifier to it. And if you've ever heard anyone say that Hero is math heavy, it's probably because of this one formula right here. This is what always throws people off. And I'm here to tell you, it's really not a big deal. In case anyone is concerned, what is being served by the bar tonight? This is a Woodford Reserve bourbon. So when we look down here and we see 2 formulas, and we say, okay, well, this is getting crazy. How am I supposed to deal with this? Well, let's just focus on. We'll come back to the formula and see how it's applied. Let's focus on determining what area effect does. So in Hero, we decide on what the base effect is. Does it do damage? Does it blind people? Does it change the environment? Does it make me invisible? Does it allow me to fly? Like, what is the core effect? And then from there, we apply modifiers to it to make it more useful or less useful. So in this case, I am going to take the area effect modifier, and specifically I want the area effect radius, and so I'm going to come down here and I'm going to look at the area effect table, and I'm going to see, oh, if I do area effect up to 4 meters, that's pretty small. Hero uses the metric system, so that's a little over 12 feet in radius. So that'll fill a good-sized room, but outside it's not going to be that big. I think I want to go with 8 meters because that's going to give me, I don't know, about a 60-foot diameter. So that'll allow me to make a statement on the battlefield. So I'm going to make a note here that I've got area effect, and I'm going to say 8 meters. And according to this chart, that's plus a half. Now, what does this plus half mean? Well, plus a half is the value of this modifier. The plus indicates that it's an advantage, that it's going to make the power cost more. If it were a limitation, which we'll get to, it would have a minus. So it might be minus 1/2, which would mean that it reduces the cost of the power. So in this case, we're going to make a note that it's going to increase the cost of the power. And I'm just going to check one thing here with my screen share and see if I can share my entire screen. I can. I can do that. All right. 1 second here. Let me reduce. So while I reduce the size of my secondary screen, does anyone have any questions so far?
Oh, well, I'm sure you'll probably go over this a little bit later. And since it's been a while since I played, because you had mentioned like 4-color games, maybe a little bit later on you can like talk about the differences between the different types of games.
Oh, sure. Yeah, actually, I'd be happy to do that.
Cool. Okay, thanks. That's it.
Get this a little bit. There we go. Now I can more easily switch back between the two. Perfect. So I picked down here 8 meters, which is a plus half advantage. So I'm going to go over my spreadsheet, and in the adds column, I'm going to put 0.5. Now I didn't put plus 0.5 because the spreadsheet, I'm already making a distinction between advantages and limitations. But that just underscores the fact the plus is just there again to identify the difference between an advantage and a limitation. So great. Now I've applied my area effect radius. Now I have an 8-meter radius damage of power. That's fantastic. But I'm also thinking, well, this may have actually gone beyond the campaign limits. So when we talked about campaign limits before, you know, the GM said, well, 12d6 is what I want my limit to be. And 12d6 equals 60 what we call active points. And active points are a measure of the power or the effectiveness of the power that you're trying to build. And so I asked my GM, say, hey GM, when you said 12d6, did you mean that 12d6 with however many active points I can get 12d6, or did you mean 12d6 and that the campaign limit is actually 60 active points on the power? And the GM comes back and says, no, you're right, Shane, it is 60 active points. I really don't want more than 60 active point powers. And I go, well, that's tough, because now I've taken my 12d6, I've added my advantage to it, which is a 0.5, and now over here I'm looking at the column and going, wow, 90 active points. That's pretty well beyond the campaign limits. And of course, like, you know, most players, and this is actually for my core group out there, they come back to me and they whine and they plead and they beg to, you know, it's like, well, it's part of my core concept. I have to have this level of power. At which point I say, suck it up, drive on, knock it down to 60 points, and find something else to whine about. So I say, okay, well, that's fine. So what can I do? Well, really, at this point, all I can do is reduce it. So I'm going to, those of us that have played Champions long enough know where the point breaks are. So I just kind of tested my theory out and dropped the active points down, or the base points down to 40. What that means is my dice, I've just made 8d6. I could have backed into this a different way. I could have just gone back to the drawing board and said, well, how about 8d6 and apply my plus half, and sure enough, now I'm at the 60 active point limit. Okay. So now I've got a standard power, one that's acceptable within campaign limits. It basically does what I want to do, which is an area effect attack. But I've also noticed that it doesn't do as much damage as I would like. You know, I do want to have a powerful attack that is on par with all my friends and with the rest of the campaign. So, you know, I'm just going to really quick make a firebolt attack as well. And this is also going to be a blast, but this is going to be a straight 12d6. And we know already that 12d6 is 60 active points, so that's great. But you know, I'm starting to build up a list of a lot of powers here, and they're kind of expensive. So I might want to think about, well, what can I do to make these a little bit cheaper? Right? I want to have some variety, and I'd like to reduce the cost of these so that I'm not paying 60 points. I mean, right there, 1660 is 120. I'm building a 300-point character. That's already 1/3 of my points, and I just have 2 attacks. That seems, you know, really harsh. No pun intended. So I'm going to take a look at, you know, what else I might be able to do, and I think about it. I go, you know what? These powers don't work in water. That seems reasonable, right? So now I'm going to apply what I call a limitation. And specifically, we're going to do a limited power. And a limited power is kind of a catch-all, where we might think about, you know, specific, as we see our limited arc of fire and limited coverage and limited effect and all these different things we got on here. Limited power is really more about judging from a campaign perspective. How much am I going to reduce the effectiveness of this power when I say, you know, it does not work in water? And so I'm, you know, looking at the list here, see if there's any inspiration. And sure enough, I get down to the bottom of the list and it says does not work underwater. Well, that seems reasonable. But it's only a -1/4. Again, the minus indicates a cost reduction, a limitation. So I come over to my character sheet. And that is a -1/4. And now I'm going to reduce my font size to fit it in there a little bit. And I'm going to put in a 0.25 in my limitations. And so now we see that the cost is reduced. And we see it over here, but we also see it over here. So now we see 3 different numbers. We see a base number, we see an active number, and a real number. So the base number equals the base level of effect, the points associated with the base level of effect. Points for base level effect. Active equals with and the pay. So base, active, and real. So pretty straightforward. I have managed to reduce this, and I'm gonna take the does not work in water. Apply that to my, and now I've reduced the cost of both of those. Now in Hero, all powers also cost endurance, and endurance is a measure of how long you can stay fighting, how much power you have available. We see it in video games. I mean, World of Warcraft has mana. I think City of Heroes had endurance. Champions Online certainly had endurance. And when you run out of power, well, then you can't use your powers anymore. However, that doesn't mean you're out for the combat. You do get some of that back. But when we're building a power, the base cost of endurance is calculated from the active cost, again going to the overall effectiveness of the power. So since both of these powers have an active cost of 60 points, the endurance is going to be 6. The base cost of endurance is 1/10 of the active cost. And again, having a character sheet like this is helpful. Using Hero Designer, all those things are calculated for you. But if you're doing it by hand, that's the way that you would do it. So what does that mean? What does that 6 endurance mean? Well, that means when I use my fireball attack or my firebolt attack, I'm going to spend 6 endurance. But how often does that come up? How often does that come back? Well, now let's jump back to the front of the character sheet and start to think about this a little bit. Because now what we're talking about are, what are my characteristics? And this is where you can start to think about, your character's background. If he's an alien, for instance, maybe his characteristics are off the charts, right? If your character is a normal person, well, then your characteristics shouldn't be off the charts, and you may have to think about some other way to power your powers so that you don't run out of endurance. So I'm going to come down to the endurance line on there, END. We'll walk through these characteristics in a minute. And I see that I have 20 endurance. Okay. So that means I've got 20 endurance. My power costs 6. I can use it 3 times, and then I'm pretty much out of power. Well, that's true. So if I want to use it more, how much endurance do I need? Well, let's see if I go up to 30. How much does that cost? Wow, only 2 points. So endurance is obviously cheap. So I might think, you know what, I'm going to be blasting up a storm. I'm going to go up to 60 endurance. Cost me 8 points. I now have 60 endurance. I can throw 10 fireballs, and then I'm out of endurance. Okay, seems reasonable. I haven't given really any thought to why my endurance might be 60, or what my character's background is. I'm going to go with some, maybe some radioactive fire or something like that, which of course then, gives me superhuman abilities across the board. So what are all these abilities, and why are there different numbers for each? Well, the first 6 should be pretty familiar to anyone that's played role-playing games. We've got Strength, Dex, and Con. Intelligence, that lines up with a significant number of games out there. Ego, this is essentially your strength of will, your strength of mind. And then presence, this is your charisma, your ability to influence people, all of that. OCV and DCV. Well, these are acronyms that stand for offensive combat value and defensive combat value. Based on the other games that you might have played, OCV is your to-hit bonus, and DCV is your not-to-be-hit bonus, otherwise called armor class in some other games, right? So this is the DCV is your chance to not be hit. OMCV and DMCV, same thing, but we're looking at mental combat values. So this is offensive mental combat value, defensive mental combat value. If you're not going to be making mental attacks, then you don't need a lot of OMCV. In fact, you probably don't need any. But for defensive mental combat value, this is, again, a reflection of your willpower. If you are not easily affected by mental powers, you would want to buy that up. It's kind of like your mental armor class. Speed. Now we're getting into a different concept than some other games. If you play games like Shadowrun that have additional action mechanics, speed is a core mechanic of Hero, and it determines how many actions you get in a combat turn. So 2 is human average. If I'm going to go with peak human, that would be like 4. If I'm going to go with superhuman, I'd be in the 5 to 6 and above range. If I start to drift into 8, now I'm getting into speedster territory. So, I'm a fiery blaster. I'm probably going to be able to fly. I'm probably going to be quick, a la Human Torch. I'm going to go with a 6. And as far as deciding what speed for your character, you really need to understand again, those campaign guidelines and ask your game master. And if you look at the champions villains that are built by default, your bricks are going to be in the 4 to 5 range. Then your mid-tier fast guys are going to be 5 to 6. When you're starting to get to like a Spider-Man, you're going to drift into 6 to 8. Your martial artists, and then by the time you get to 8, we're really talking about speedsters, and that's pretty typical of the champions villains books that are built, or just most campaign guidelines. And as we can see, speed costs a lot. It costs 10 points per. So then over here in the phases, it's now the number of phases I have has changed. So if I look at 2, I only go in 6 and 12, and if I go up to 6, I now go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. Okay, great, Shane. What are the other speed factors? How do they factor in? So I'm going to zoom in here on the speed chart as an example, and talk about the combat turn. The combat turn is broken down into 12 segments. They're 1 second long. And your speed allows you to act a number of times over the course of these 12 segments, equal to the value of your speed. So at a speed of 6, I can see that I get to act on 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. If I were a zombie, I might only have a speed of 1. If I'm a normal human, I'm going to be on a 6 and a 12. A human athlete is going to be a 3 or a 4, and you can see that their distribution, all the way up to a speed 12, which would be like the Flash, where he's going 12 times. So that's why I'm saying that the speed 6 is a good middle ground for a fairly fast character that isn't a speedster. This also tells me how often I'm going to get to recover. At the end of segment 12, there is a free recovery phase. We call it the post-segment 12 recovery phase. And it's kind of hanging off here after segment 12 before it comes back around and the GM starts counting up from 1 to 12 again. And that determines, this stat right here, how much endurance and stun I get back every combat turn. So right now I'm only getting back 4. And if I think about my Fire Blast, if every time I get an action, so every time I get an action is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. If every time I get an action I'm using my Fire Blast, then that means I'm going to use 6 endurance, 6 endurance, 6 endurance, 6 endurance, 6 endurance, 6 endurance. So in any combat turn, I'll be burning through 36 endurance, not counting any of my other powers, which I haven't built yet. Great. And then I'm only going to get 4 back. That's not a lot. So a fair guideline, not really, any kind of gospel, is twice whatever your core power is. So I've got a 6 endurance power. I'm gonna take 12 recovery. That'll at least give me 2 attacks back if I've been completely spent. Gives me a lot of flexibility. Plus, it allows me to recover some stun. Once I've taken a hit. Welcome back, Thomas. So great. We got this up there. I've now figured out my endurance. We've talked a little bit about what recovery does, and now I can go back to building my powers. I've got some sense of how quickly I'm going to burn through my endurance, and we'll get into some of the rest of these a little bit later. Any questions? Okay. I'm going to copy this down and get it a little bit off screen or lower on the screen. So now I need to think about a defensive power. And I can imagine that I'm going to, have a sheath of flames. Now, conceptually, that's a pretty dangerous concept. When I say sheath of flames, what often comes to mind as well is the fact that lost my character sheet. There we go. That it actually causes some damage. I'm going to leave that aside. You can absolutely build a power like that. It's what is known in Champions as a damage shield. It's actually a special form of area effect. I'm not gonna get into building that right now, but I'm gonna focus on my defense. So in my mind, I'm gonna have a lot of resistance to energy and maybe some physical. I think conceptually that works. I've got this big sheath of flames going all around. Any kind of energy tax, whether it's light or water or whatever, is probably going to be mitigated fairly well, at least in my character's mind. But physical attacks, not quite as much. Flames aren't solid, but the heat does provide some amount of protection. So I'm going to run with that concept. But how do I represent that? What power is core to that? So I'm going to go back up to my powers list. And I'm going to look at the list of defensive powers. And I see that there are a number of defensive powers here. Barrier, characteristic, PD and ED. I could just raise my PD and ED. Damage negation, damage reduction, those are good choices. Knockback resistance, power defense. I don't really know what power defense is. We'll talk about that later. Resistant protection. That seems to fit the bill. So we're going to jump to resistant protection and take a look at that. And let me zoom back out here so we're not. So there we go. So resistant protection. Looking at this, it says 3 character points per 2 points of resistant defense. Okay. Resistant protection, I can choose from PD, ED, flash defense, mental defense. Wow, okay, I can make all of those resistant. And points of resistant protection add to any other defenses. All right, that seems pretty good. But why would I want to buy resistant protection? What makes that special? It says here, this includes suits of armor, bulletproof vests, personal force fields. Okay, that's right on the money. Now, before we had talked about the 2 types of damage, and remember I said we had normal damage and we had killing damage. Well, that's great. Well, this actually plays into the type of defenses that you build. Normal damage is stopped by PD, which is what we also call normal defenses. Killing damage is stopped by and that is not characteristic. So right now, if I were to get hit with a killing attack, which would be like a gun or perhaps a laser, I would have no way to defend myself. And even looking at my paltry PD and ED of 2 and 2, that's also pretty low. I can barely take a punch as it is. So I think I'm going to go with this resistant protection power. And again, I've got to ask my GM, so what are the campaign guidelines on resistant defenses? And campaign guidelines, typically on resistant defenses, run around the 10 to 12 range. So if I were to buy 12 or possibly even 16, that might be really high. But a way to think about it is whatever the maximum number of dice on an attack are, that's typically the maximum amount of resistant defense that a GM is going to allow in the campaign. So I'm going to run with that. I feel that my flame should be pretty tough. But again, I did say that it was going to be more resistant to energy and maybe some physical. So we've got resistant protection, and I'm going to go with 12 ED. I'm going to max out, but I think my normal, or I'm sorry, the physical should maybe be half of that. Now, is there any reason that I should buy that? No, I could buy them 12 and 12. I have a limited number of points. But again, it goes to my whole reasoning from effect, my core concept. I'm a fire guy. I'm going to build in an inherent weakness that I am more easily affected by physical attacks, and then hopefully the fact that, as I build my other powers, I'm flying around, I can be good to go and stay away from those crazy punches. So looking back at my cost, it says 3 character points per 2 points of resistant defense. Well, I've got 12 ED and 6 PD. That's 18 total. So 2 points. So that's going to be 9 times 3 is 27. 27 is my base cost. Because it's 3 character points, 2 resistant defense. I had 18 resistant defense. Divide that by 2 gives me 9. Multiply that by 3, I get 27. So that's my base power. Well, that's great. Now, what this gives me is it gives me a sheath of flames that's always on, that it's active. Now, does not cost endurance. It is persistent. I can turn it on and off, but I see this note over here, resistant protection that costs endurance. Interesting. So what this means is right now, inherently, resistant protection costs no endurance. It's just always on. But if I make it cost endurance, I get an additional -1/2 limitation. And in fact, I could even make it perceivable and take a -1/4 because it's a huge sheath of flames that's bright and visible. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do costs endurance -1/2 and perceivable. And I'll reduce those. So there I had a 0.5 limitation and a 1/4 limitation. So I put those in there. And now notice that my cost goes from 27 down to 15. Well, that's pretty cool. But now I do cost endurance again. So now I have to pay 3 endurance. How often do I have to pay that endurance? Every phase that sheath of flames is active. Okay. That's cool, but that might be a little bit tricky. So I think I need to also up my normal PD and ED so I'm not just a complete pushover. And here again, we think about the campaign limits, and usually the campaign limits for normal defenses, PD and ED, are about double what they are for resistant. So we had said that my resistant limitation was 12. That's the maximum resistant defense you could have in the campaign. So I'm going to go with my ED, I'm going to pump that up to 24. Because I'm an energy machine. You just really can't hurt me with energy all that easily. But I'm also going to stick with kind of my core concept that while I'm more durable than the normal human, I'm going to go with a 12 PD. And that's pretty tough, pretty high. And now I've kind of settled on my defenses. And I think that's good. I think that's good enough for now. I've got kind of a core. I got to keep in mind that you know, I'm only a 300-point character, and I've already spent 199 points. So I gotta get a couple more powers in here. So now we finished defenses. Any questions? Checking the chat. Don't see any in the chat. Okay.
When your armor costs power or costs endurance,
Yeah.
you have to pay it every phase. But is that every phase that it's active would be 12 phases?
Oh no. So that's a good question. Let me jump back to the speed chart here. So when I say phase, it's each of these little hero mans, right? My phases are on 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. I only have to pay endurance on those phases. So if I pay endurance on phase 2, then my Sheath of Flames is up on phase 2. It's on segment 3, and then it persists all the way until my phase starts again on phase 4. So that's the distinction between a segment, which there are 12 of them, and the phase, which represents my action. So if I'm a faster character, if I get more actions, my abilities will require more endurance because I'm going to be using them more often. Now that might be an argument that you might want to have this only cost half endurance, or go back and say, you know what, it's going to be it's not going to cost any endurance, but I'm going to apply a limitation. Let me zoom back up here. Right here, non-persistent. Non-persistent is a fun limitation when you really kind of getting to what you want. Like, wow, I'm a high-speed character. I've got a very expensive defense power. I don't want to have to pay endurance for that every phase. And resistant protection doesn't cost endurance by default, but I can apply non-persistent to it. And what that means is if I'm knocked out, my power shuts off. But if I'm conscious, I can say my power is on, and as long as I've been able to act and turn my power on, then I'm good to go. So I might apply non-persistent in that case to keep my endurance more manageable. But at the same time, you know, the Sheath of Flames is extremely effective. It's a 12 resistant protection power is pretty potent. And I'm going to be nigh invulnerable to most energy attacks. So it's reasonable to have to pay 3 endurance for that. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome. So I've got my defense power. Let's move on to a movement power. So we're going to pick a classic one, right? We're going to go with, I'm going to call it Fireflight. And you can pretty well guess that yes, indeed, there is a flight power. And I go there, and it's kind of a standard hero system movement build of 1 character point per meter of flight. It does cost endurance. So all right, so I'm going to have to pay some endurance, but the endurance is probably going to be pretty low. Now, the question is, how much movement is enough? Well, again, that depends on your campaign, but if you think about it in combat terms, other than the superheroes that you're going to be facing, you're going to be squaring off with normal human beings. Normal human beings have 12 meters of running, and maybe go up to 20, right? If we're talking about some of the some of your athletes. So 20 meters of movement is a pretty solid clip. And especially since, if you've got a speed of 6, you're going to be moving along pretty quickly. So in combat, 20 to 30 meters is probably really good if you want to be fast. If you're happy, being kind of normal speed, you might see your bricks at around 12 to 16 meters because they really just don't care. A lot of time, they might buy some leaping to go with it so they can, get that super strength leaping action on you. So with that in mind, I'm going to do flight 20 meters. But we were talking about endurance before, and you know what? I'm just such an inferno. For my flight. Reduced endurance advantage to it. And I'll pull that up for you here. And reduced endurance allows you to take any power that costs endurance normally and either get it at half endurance or get it at 0 endurance. So I'm going to go all the way for the +1/2. I'm not going to buy a huge amount of flight. So the original flight power had said that it was 1 character point per meter of flight. I've got 20 meters, so there's my base. I've got 0.5 add for my reduced endurance. So now I have a 30 active point power. And because it's reduced endurance, 0 endurance, I'm going to go over to the endurance column and put 0. So now I could activate my flight, and I'm good to go. But maybe I want to go really fast, like really, really fast. And I see there's a note here on non-combat movement, and that's on page 131. So I'm going to go to 131. And I see this idea of combat and non-combat movement. It says character using non-combat movement moves at double his combat movement rate, while moving non-combat movement velocity, a character is at 0 OCV and half DCV. Okay, so that basically means if I'm moving non-combat, which is essentially sprinting, but we have to apply it, there's no sprint flying, right? So we call it non-combat. I really can't make attacks when I use non-combat movement, and I'm also a lot easier to hit. All right, so I'm not going to want to use it a lot. But how much does it cost to get more than that non-combat movement? Well, I don't see anything in here, but I do recall that when it broke down the powers, it did mention movement powers. So I come up here, and it lists all the movement powers. And non-combat, nope, not there. And there we go, non-combat, acceleration, all right, this is interesting. I know what the rule is, but I'm trying to show you where the rule is located. Powers. There we are. Wow. All right. I'm going to chalk that up to my lack of familiarity with the Champions Complete rulebook. But I did find it. So here it is. Improved non-combat movement. +5 character points per additional 2 times non-combat velocity, and then it just keeps going up and up and up and up. So it doubles every time. Well, I want to be super fast when I need to. So I'm going to get a ×8 non-combat multiplier, and it says ×8 for plus 10 character points. Perfect. So that actually raises my base cost. So now, in combat, with my normal combat stats, full OCV, full DCV, I can move 20 meters. Great. But non-combat, if I really need to jet across town, I can multiply that by 8. But when I do so, I go down to 0 OCV and I go to half DCV. So that allows me to move 160 meters. And that can really allow me to get out of there. And especially because I am at 0 endurance, that is really booking. So now I have a flight power, and I can hover as long as I want. It doesn't cost me an endurance. I'm actually pretty quick when I need to be. So now I'm in pretty good shape. Going back to the front, looking at my total, I'm at 244. Wow, okay. I'm using up a lot of my points, but I have settled on a number of my stats. I'm going to walk through these stats again, pick some out. My strength, I'm going to be like athletic human. I'm going to go with a 15. Human maximum for strength, dex, con, intelligence, ego, and presence is 20. Dex, I'm going to be fairly nimble. I'm going to go with a 20 dex. I'm going to be, really peak human as far as that goes. Con, again, I'm pretty tough after, my fire radiation accident. Intelligence, I'm just going to be an average Joe. I think that fits my concept. Maybe I was a construction worker that was down on his luck and, just really didn't have anywhere to go. So I'm gonna go with maybe a low self-esteem. I'm going to keep my presence at 10, and then my ego. But I'm a hard-working guy. I've got a strong strength of mind. People can't bend my will all that easily. I'm going to go with a 20 ego, and that gives me a pretty good spread of stats there. Wow, I'm at 289. I'm running out of some points here. OCV and DCV. These you have to pick from your campaign guidelines. Again, typically the GM would set those down. Peak human is 8. So typically in a superhero game, you're going to see anywhere from 6 on the really low end, upwards of 10 or 12. I like my characters in my campaigns to stay in that 8 to 10 range. I think that's a pretty good sweet spot. DMCV, again, I've got a pretty good strength of mind here. I'm gonna go with a 5. Body. We talked about PD, we talked about ED, we talked about recovery, how much stun and endurance you get back. But what's body? Body is also averages at 10, goes to 20. And in superhero games, unless you're playing kind of a gritty game, body tends to not come into play all that often. So I'm going to go with a healthy 14. If I was a brick, I might want to be a lot higher. I'm definitely tougher than the average person, but I'm not outside the human range. Stun, I'm probably going to go with 40. I'm not super tough when it comes to being knocked out. So these two, body and stun. Body is when you run out of body, you're dying. When you run out of stun, you're unconscious. Now there's specific benchmarks for when you're dead and when you're in a coma. But the core concept is if your body gets to 0, you're dying. If your stun gets to 0, you're unconscious. As long as you still have a recovery, hasn't been drained away or anything like that, at the end of that 12th segment, you're going to recover. some of that stun. So it's very possible for you to get taken out of a fight and come back in at the start of another turn. And that's kind of the ebb and flow of combat. From a GM perspective, that especially for nameless NPCs, when they run out of stun, they're out of the fight, right? They're not going to get back in. They've obviously been beaten down. They have no interest in trying to sustain the fight. Named PCs, your villains and what have you, typically you would track them, bring them back into the fight if they got knocked out, especially if they got minions to protect them. So it becomes a fun part of the game to manage this stun resource and how you're going to deal with it. Running, I've got my good flight power. I'm just going to stay at the normal human for running, for leaping, and for swimming. I'm not going to change those. So what are we looking at? Oh, wow. We're at 339. I'm already over my 300 points. This presents an interesting conundrum, right? We've established that these are kind of my core powers. There's not a lot of powers there. There's 4 key powers. So, I might ask my game master, hey, have we picked the right point value for the campaign? Could we consider going to 400 points? I haven't even bought any skills yet, so, I do have some concerns there. And as you dig into the rules, there are some advanced rules that allow me to essentially not have to pay full points for both of these attacks. Because right now, technically, within the rules, if I chose to, I could do a fireball and a firebolt at the same time. If I wanted to build this in a way that I couldn't do that, then actually I could reduce my cost greatly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave this as is. I'm not really going to worry about my point total. The mechanic for that is what is called a multi-power, and I'll to you, but I'm going to save multi-powers for another day. They're not that complex, but they do warrant a discussion. And here it talks about multi-powers and talks about how to build them. And the multi-power concept, if you've played games like Mutants and Masterminds, Mutants and Masterminds has a concept of an array. Trying to think of another superhero game, but the idea is that it's like a selector switch, right? I have a core power which I might call produce flame, and within that produce flame power, I can do a fireball, a firebolt, a ring of fire, a fire sword, a burst of firebolts. Like I'm gonna have like any number of variant type of attacks. But I don't pay full cost for them because I can only do them one at a time, right? They just represent different manifestations of my power. So I'm going to ignore that for a moment. Any questions on what we've been talking about so far? Okay. So cool. I've got my core characteristics, but as I mentioned, I don't have my skills. And you can see here that the character sheet does pull in the data from the powers worksheet, which is nice. Kind of gives you the summary format there. So skills, perks, and talents. And this is really where we flesh out, what makes your character your character. And let's see. Oh yeah, it was down here. So on page 173, in the Building a Superhero, it talks about what skill sets you might buy. So we see, athlete, animal trainer, observer, cultist, sailor, wheelman, grease monkey. And I think Grease Monkey fits. I said I was kind of, down on my luck, construction worker. I think Grease Monkey goes along with that. And so, inventor and mechanics, not so much on the inventor side. Maybe be a longshoreman, wheelman. Could be a pilot. Yeah, we'll go with pilot. I can fly. That kind of fits. So I'm going to go with that. So I'm going to take combat piloting, navigation, systems operation, and TF for various aircraft. So if we ever have a team jet into play, systems operation, and transport familiarity, commercial fighter. So I'm going to take commercial airlines and fighters. Well, that's great. That gives me a good sense. I'm also going to go with a athlete. So here we got acrobatics, breakfall, climbing. It's a good inspiration. I'm not really worried about the climbing because I can fly, but we'll go with the acrobatics and breakfall. We'll add those two. Fantastic. I got a good sense of the skills that I want to have. Let me look at perks. So perks, we're talking about followers, fringe benefits like licenses, having lots of money. Bruce Wayne, for instance, would have, Batman would have a lot of money, vehicles and bases. I don't really have a lot of that. Let me see if there's anything in the actual perks list that access, contact, followers, favors, positive reputation. No, not really. But when we look to talents, these are things that are kind of like powers light. Bumper direction, maybe. Combat sense, danger sense, lightning reflexes. I am pretty fast, but I already have a 20 dex, so I'm not really worried about that. Double jointed. Nope. Nothing here really fits for my character. I could go with striking appearance if I wanted to make my flame an issue. So I think I'm good there. So let's focus on buying skills. So the base cost for a skill depends on its type. Is it an agility skill? Is it a background skill? Is it a combat skill, intellect skill, or interaction skill? Most skills conform to this 3 character points for a skill roll, and then I can increase it. Background skills are at 2 points for a base roll and 1 point, and then combat skills vary. So it looks like I might have to look these up. There is a summary table in the back. Here we are, skills summary table. So you can see, by skill, by type, what the cost is. So I'm going to look at that. I've got combat piloting. That is 3/2. And what this means is for 3 points, I get a base skill roll equal to 9 plus dexterity divided by 5. Okay, if I come over here, look at my dex, I could calculate that, but it's also already calculated my roll for me. Cool. So for 3 points, I get my dex roll. So I'm going to do that over here. I'm going to put 3 points. And my dex roll was 13 or less. So I list that there. I'm going to do a 13 minus to do the notation. And I think I built this dex roll. Did I? I did not. All right. So 13 or less. And then I look at navigation, and I see the same thing. 3/2, but it's intellect, so it's based off my intelligence. Okay, perfect. So my intelligence roll is 11. Go back here. So 3 points, 11 or less. Systems operation, also an intellect skill, also a 3/2 skill. So I go 3 points, 11 or less. Transport familiarity. Oh, varies on page 35. We'll come back to that. Go back up to acrobatics, 3/2, and for my dex, that's easy. I know my dex roll is a 13. And Breakfall, also Dex. So 3 and 13 or less. So let's look up Transport Familiarity and see how that one is costed. Transport Familiarity. Here we go. 1 character point per Transport Familiarity with 1 class of conveyances and 2 for a large class. So I asked my GM, hey, GM, can I just get all airplanes for 2 points? And the GM says, sure, 2 points. Otherwise, you know, if we were playing a more gritty game, I might have to pay 1 point for each type of aircraft. So I pay 2 points, and I have airplanes. That goes with my combat pilot, and that's great. But I'm going to jump back to that skills table again and see, okay, but what's the /2 mean? Well, the /2 means that for every 2 points I put into it, I can raise my roll by 1. So I know I want to be doing some tricky acrobatic maneuvers in my flying, so I'm actually going to put two points in there. So I'm going to buy it twice, 3 plus 2 plus 2. So I've got 7 points in it, and that's going to allow me those additional, 2 points, two purchases of 2 points each are going to allow me to raise it by 2 points. So I get to take this to a 15 or less. So what does that mean, 15 or less? How do we even resolve things in Hero? Well, Hero skill rolls and attack rolls are all based on 3d6. I roll 3 6-sided dice, and if I get that number or less, it's a success. So for acrobatics, I need a 15 or less. On 3d6, I'm going to succeed like 95% of the time. Why would I want it so high? Well, of course, so I can try, tricky maneuvers, especially if, perhaps I'm going up against another flying target, and we're flying through the streets of Detroit, and we're dodging around buildings and stuff like that. We might do a contest of acrobatics to see who can outmaneuver each other, and so then having a high acrobatic skill is going to pay off. Okay, great. I've got my skills, but what I don't have is I don't have a background skill, and I had said, you know what? Before I was a pilot, I was a constructor. Professional skill, which I noted as PS, and I look on here and I look at professional skill. Yep, it says background, and it says 11 or less or character based. And I look at the 11 or less costs 2 points, or I can base it off a characteristic for 3. Basing it off a characteristic means I pay 3 points and I get it based off of one of these skills. I don't think that that's necessary. I just kind of want it there for a background. So I'm going to spend 2 points and just get it at my base 11 or less. And in some campaigns, the Game Master may even give me a free background skill. Just, pick one and take it at 11 or less. That's called an everyman skill. So there we go. I've got a couple of powers. I've got my skills. Coming back to the front, what's my total point? 362. Well, I might, the GM might ask me to reduce my characteristics, or, we had talked about perhaps building that multi-power and getting my costs down. I'm pretty sure that with a few pokes and prods, I could get this into the 300-point range. I'm going to leave it there for now. Now, looking at the rest of the character sheet, I've got some blanks here that I want to fill out. And the first blank that comes to mind was matching complications. And when we had started this, doing character creation and picking our character guidelines, we said 360 matching complications. So I'm going to put in 60 matching complications, but now I got to jump to the complication section. Take a look at what goes into a complication. And there is a golden rule of complications that is a complication that doesn't complicate your character's life isn't worth any points. So if it's not going to be interesting to the game, then it really shouldn't have any value. Now we've got some standard ones, accidental change, thinking of the Hulk or like a werewolf. Dependence, perhaps I have to bathe in fire on a regular basis, or I've got an addiction. Perhaps I have an Aunt May. You know what? I'm gonna put a. I have a kid brother who is always getting into trouble, and that's a DN dependent NPC. I'm going to put him as a normal. So he's probably about 50 points. He's competent, but he's not a superhero, so that's worth 5 points. I'm going to say it happens only infrequently. I don't want this. I don't want my kid brother in every adventure. And I could take this modifier where he's not aware that I'm adventuring, and I think I'm going to make him kind of ignorant of that. So he's a DMPC. He's normal. It's infrequent. Drop my font size down. There we go. And so that was 5 for normal, 5 for infrequent, and 5 for unaware. So that's 15 points. And it's important as you're building these complications that they reflect aspects of your character, and that you also give a copy of these to your GM so that they can work them into the game. Distinctive features. One of the decisions you have to make is, do you have a secret identity? I think I just established that I do have a secret identity. Distinctive features wouldn't really be appropriate, but that might be, something like a particular gang tattoo, possibly even an organizational affiliation that you always have to work with. Enraged and Berserk. If you lose control of your character, then this would be the complication to take. The difference between Enraged and Berserk is Enraged, you can direct your anger, but you can't do anything defensive. So with Enraged, you can still attack only the bad guys. If you go Berserk, you'll attack anybody. Now, Hunted, interesting. I am going to take Hunted by... And what do they want to do? They are more powerful than I am. Again, I'm going to go with infrequent. So up every adventure. So right now we're at 15. They're going to have extensive non-combat influence. So they can, talk to senators and affect laws and, different things like that. And they want to harshly punish. I'm going to put that as a harsh study. Sectomy. So I'm an escaped lab experiment. Maybe I was in their employ when the accident occurred, and I decided, you know what? I don't want to be studied, and I managed to break out, and they've been hunting me ever since. So more powerful 15, infrequency 0, extensive non-com. So that's 20, and harshly punished no modifier. So change it to NCI. So that's 20 points. Fantastic. Negative reputation. Perhaps my superhero has a penchant for starting fires, but at this point, I don't know if I want to build that up. We'll see how the campaign goes, if I actually do set a bunch of stuff on fire. Physical complication. This would actually be something that, a classic example would be blind or deaf, or although those get into an area where you might sell back some of your base game elements. But a good example for an alien, no knowledge of Earth culture. They can't simply, they simply can't learn Earth culture. Starfire is a good example. She's immersed in it. She's always, playing around with the Teen Titans, but she never ever gets it, right? She never ever evolves. She's kind of stuck in being alien, the Earth culture being alien to her. A physical complication, if I was always large, might be an issue. I don't really have any physical complications. Psychological complications, on the other hand, that I might have. And we have some of our classic code against killing, chivalrous, code of honor, fear of heights, our classic fears, compulsions. I'm definitely going to go with overconfident. I am and this is a psychological complication. And here we're going to say, you know what, overconfident, that's pretty common. That's going to happen a lot. And I'm going to say I'm pretty strong. I'm going to make some irrational choices. So I'm going to do common, to be 15 points. Right now I'm at 50. I only need another 10. Social complication. Yeah, I'm going to go with the secret identity. More because it's likely to trigger my hunted if it becomes obvious where I'm found. But I'm kind of a nobody, so I'm gonna say that it's infrequent, and I'm gonna go with major because it's gonna be getting after me. Infrequent and major, so 5 and 5 is 10. That gives me my 60. So there we go. Now, some Champions players, they don't track the points associated with complications. They say just, pick 5 that are interesting. There's different ways that you can play it. Hero is a game of options, but the classic way to play Champions is to, adjust these in that way. Looks like we have someone joining the other Hangout. Sean, if you look in the thread, there's an updated one for the Hangout on Air if you want to drop out of that one and join that one. So that pretty much rounds out my character in terms of matching complications, origin, construction, work. Involved in accident, studied by Meg, and now there we go. There's my background. Sean, now that you're online, we're actually in a Hangout on Air. If you look in the thread, you can see the other link if you want to join in on that. Okay, so got that done. Now looking at my powers, I do have my flight 20 meters in non-combat, so I'm just going to make a note on my character sheet here, flight 20 meters, and my non-combat is ×8. I'm going to make notes 0. Find myself. Now I'm going to add up all my defenses. This is pretty critical. You need to do that before you take a punch. So my normal PD is going to equal my PD characteristic plus also my resistant PD. And we had bought some resistant PD, so looking at my powers, I have 12 resistant ED and 6 resistant PD. So I'm going to put 12 and 6 here, but I'm going to make a note that those cost 3 endurance. And so my normal is going to be my base. Whoops, got those backwards. My normal is going to be my base characteristic plus this resistant. So when I've got my resistant active, I'm at 18. I'm going to list this as 18/12, 18 in an ideal world. And same thing over here. I've got my base 24 plus my 12. I'm going to go with 36 and then 24. So now we know when we get hit how much damage we can stop. Unfortunately, I've got no mental defense, no power defense, and no flash defense, so I can be easily mind controlled. Although my ego is very high, I can be affected by special powers, and I can be easily blinded. But that's pretty typical. At this point, the character is more or less ready to play. I'd want to give him a name. Give him a better description. I didn't buy any special senses, and I didn't really buy any special combat skills or anything like that. Something that I could look into. So let's take a look at that. Coming over to skills, we recalled that combat skill levels have their own rating, their own cost scale. So we see it's broken down into specific, small group, large group, all hand-to-hand or range, and all combat. So what is a CSL and what can I do with it? Well, at a base level, a combat skill level, it's like raising your skill by 1 point. A combat skill level allows you to raise your attack roll by 1 point. They also have some other uses that they talk about in terms of trading them for damage. You can use them to right here, right at the top. Assigning 2 combat skill levels to damage gives a +1 damage class, which is like an additional die. You can also assign a skill level to DCV. So skill levels give you a little bit more flexibility in combat. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go with a small group, which is my, right here they give an example of light attacks. I'm going to go with fire attacks. So I'm going to say CSL fire attacks, and that fits the 3 per. I'm going to spend 6 points, and I'm going to get +2. On the front here, I'm going to make a note of that I've got +2. And so then that would allow me to increase my OCV when I'm making my fire attacks and allow me to hit targets more easily. Now we're coming up on the 2-hour mark, which actually, this being the first one of these I'm done, gives me a good sense that I can walk through the character creation in about 2 hours. Normally what I would do in a 4-hour session is at this point, if everyone's been following along, we'd take the characters and we'd go into a combat. So right now I just kind of want to open it up for any questions that you might have. And I know, Bethany, you'd had the comment of talking about the different genres of playing hero, so I'll certainly talk to that once I make sure I field any questions. Any questions out there? So everyone's made their characters, they're all ready to jump into a campaign now? So it does take a little getting used to. I hope that the process that I went through, starting with some of the core concept powers, what represents your character most, and then kind of building from that, that there was something a little bit organic to it, like when we figured out how much endurance we wanted to have and how we wanted to work with that. There are There is the Hero System Powers book, which actually has a whole bunch of pre-built powers by special effect type. As I had brought up before, the Champions 6th edition, when, let's see, gallery. In here, in the Champions book, it does give a lot of examples, but it also has templates. I'm looking for the templates. Let me look at the... Any questions while I'm looking this up? Points. There we are. Yeah, 243. So here in the Superhero Gallery, this is the Champions 6th edition book. So this is the genre book for running superheroes. It actually goes through each archetype. It builds a whole bunch of detailed skill sets, some complication sets, Seeker of Vengeance, Infamous Hero, Tragic Past, those type of thing. And then when it gets to the power sets, here's a classic blaster, gives you kind of a starting set of characteristics, and then you walk through and essentially just pick these powers out, picking out characteristic sets, choosing flight, and it gives you a good sense of power. So even if you're not going to use the template 100%, it does give you a good sense of what should you consider when building a blaster, or what should you consider when you're building a brick. I have used this in a convention setting. I run what's called a Champions Quick Start. It's a 3-hour event. We spend 2 hours, just like we did here, using these templates to build characters. At the end of the 2-hour mark, everyone has a character, and then we do a 1-hour combat and get everyone into the game. See how it plays. As far as rules go, I'm happy to answer any questions as far as like how combat works or anything like that. I'm just not going to go into a whole combat session tonight.
Would you say that the character costs are higher in 6 than they were in previous versions?
Yeah, they're in heroic games they're about 25 to 50 points higher. In super heroic games they can be about 100 points more. So I mean, Robert, you've been probably following Champions for as long as I have. The original Champions, your starting hero was 250 points.
Right.
And then, in 5th edition, we went up into, what, 300?
Mm-hmm.
300?
Right.
And then going to 6th edition, that kind of the default hero is 400 for a superhero. And that's a pretty good level to start out at.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you fine. Thomas, you got a question?
Okay, no, I was just going to make a statement. I was going to say, keep in mind that the actual point cost of the effectiveness of powers hasn't actually changed from edition to edition. From the 4th edition to the 6th edition, if you make a 12d6 type of attack, it's pretty much the same effectiveness between the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th edition. It's just that people, for some odd reason, seem to feel that they needed more points to facilitate the types of characters they wanted. Since the standard was 250, many people felt that was too low, which is why it was increased in later editions.
Well, that is true. Certainly, mechanically, a lot of the powers function and are built the same way. However, the one change in the 6th edition is by eliminating the figured characteristics.
Right.
There is an inherent increase in the cost of the character because
that did increase the cost of the characters a little.
yeah, and because you're not getting anything for free, and especially when you're talking higher powered characters, some of that did carry through. But I do agree with you. My sweet spot personally is I like the lower powered superhero games. I like keeping the powers a bit more reasonably defined in a power level, and and not going so overboard and not having everyone have a massive amount of powers. But to each his own. And certainly Captain America built on 300 points is different than 400 is different than 600. And all of those Captain Americas existed at one point or another. It's just where do you want to what power level do you want to bring your character in? So Bethany, you talked about you had a question about the different genres, and so in the back of the Champions Complete, they talk about playing other genres. So here we're talking about playing fantasy, science fiction, horror, post-apocalyptic, swashbuckling, and it also talks about kind of campaign standards for those, and a lot of those are heroic. And you'll see throughout the book, you'll see this distinction of heroic or superheroic. And heroic usually implies that death is a more real factor. A lot of times that you're going to use some of the more heroic combat options that existed within the game, such as hit location, such as bleeding, things like that, to make the game a bit more gritty. That's actually almost all of my games that I run are in that. I usually running post-apocalyptic or fantasy or cyberpunk or something like that. So I'm running more in the heroic genre or in the heroic type. It's still hero, so I would call it action movie realism, as opposed to really true simulationist gritty realism. But I think it's a good balance because it allows it allows you to capture the feel of being gritty, tracking bullet by bullet, having headshots or having characters bleed out or anything like that. But at the same time, because it's hero, it is kind of difficult for your character to just die outright. It's not impossible, but
I'm going to have to interject there. It's only that difficult if the defenses are there and if body scores are bought up. If body scores are kept at the normal human range between 8 and 12 and the defenses aren't necessarily there, it's incredibly easy for your character to die in Hero.
Yeah, and I think that with the move to 6th edition with the removal of the figured characteristics really has an impact on the grittiness or street levelness of the system overall.
I don't disagree with what either of you are saying, but I am pointing out that it's a relative statement.
Right.
That relative to other games like perhaps GURPS or EVA or Cyberpunk 2020, the lethality is not as high as can be found in those games because of the way hero functions. But that's I don't consider that a drawback, and you're absolutely right, Thomas. Depending on how the weapons are set, what the campaign guidelines are, how the characters are built, how easy it is to get any kind of defenses. Do you allow your characters to buy tons of combat luck? Things like that. You can reinforce the grittiness or buffer that grittiness to the appropriate level that you want to see. Now, the flip side of that, Bethany, is you would also, I mentioned 4-color and other genres. So what I'm talking about are the kind of the classic comic book genres, and Yeah, so here, in the Champions book, they talk about, the different ages of comic books, and these are somewhat analogous to some of the grit conversations we were just having. So Golden Age, these are your kind of like your masked, mysterious men, right? Looking at kind of the early ages of comic books, the Shadow, Doc Savage, things like that, almost like superpowered pulps. Then we slip into Silver Age, which we kind of recognize as one of the classic comic books coming into their own. These are the 60s comics that we see. And then by the late 60s and early 70s, we're starting to see this transition into Bronze, where it's not just truth, justice, and the American way. It's not just the heroes doing good things. It's now we're going to make them more complicated. And I think the classic of the Bronze Age we're talking about the Chris Claremont X-Men. We're talking about injecting some soap opera in it, making some tough choices, dealing with some real-world issues. Still not quite getting into gritty, but we are starting to see things become a bit more dangerous in the comics and see some hard choices occur. Maybe even see a couple characters here and there die. And then finally, we kick off Iron Age, where now we're getting into Dark Knight Returns, Spawn, some really hardcore, grim, gritty. Death is common. It doesn't necessarily have to be all guns and violence, right? It can be supernatural. It can be, but it's hard choices, hard decisions, with tough impacts on characters. So when you're looking to run a Champions game, you one of the things you want to pick and tell your players is what subgenre are we going to be playing, because that will absolutely impact the choice of character that they're going to make, right? You're not gonna make it's an interesting choice to make, but generally you wouldn't make kind of a goody two shoes, good Samaritan type if you're running an Iron Age game, unless you wanted to be playing off of everyone else's grim, gritty choices, and you're kind of that last beacon of goodness. Does that help kind of round out the genre question for you?
You did. You answered it perfectly. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. All right. Well, I think I'm going to wrap things up here. I thank you all for attending. I'm going to definitely do this again. We did it a bit later for the West Coasters. Normally I would want to extend it in and do a sample combat running on Roll20. So I'll be sure to communicate that out through Facebook and Google+, but also on the Hero books or on the Hero boards. And encourage anyone new to Hero, come on over to the Hero boards. There plenty of great people there, very helpful, and they'll even dive in. You say, hey, I'm trying to build a power that does this for my character, and you'll probably get more information than you want. 20 people are going to build that power 20 different ways, and you'll get to pick which one you like the most.
And also, don't forget, we have a Hero Games community here on Google Plus as well.
Yeah, there's one on Google Plus and on Facebook as well. And I see a lot of the same usual suspects on both, as are on the Hero boards. One of the nice things I encourage you in coming into the Hero community, unique compared to some games, you can go to the Hero boards and you can actually post a question to the line developer. There's a special forum there. You can ask an official question. I encourage you to search the forums first and maybe post a question to the forums before you post it to the line developer. But it's been fantastic, and actually the development of 5th edition into 6th edition was born out of a lot of those questions and building the FAQs that came from those forum questions. So it's a great resource to have. That's over at HeroGames.com, and you should have everything you need. So thank you much. Sean, I see your comment there. I'll link up with you after as soon as I turn off the broadcast. And get out there and do some good justice. Bye.
Thank you, Shane.